So how does a kingdom, right, on the edge of the world's biggest empire survive for a whole century, only to get wiped out because of a fashion choice? Seriously. Today, we're going to unpack that exact story, the dramatic 100-year saga of how North Africa's last great native kingdom was just swallowed whole by Rome.
Okay, so this timeline right here, this is basically our roadmap. It all kicks off in 46 BC when Julius Caesar conquers Numidia. Then you see a bit of a comeback for local rule around 25 BC. And it all comes to a really violent and honestly super weird end in 40 AD. That's the 100-year journey we're about to take. All right, let's dive in. Our story starts back in 46 BC. Now, you'd think when Rome establishes a new order somewhere, it'd start with, order. But nope, not at all. This one begins with total chaos. Right after a huge Roman victory and an even bigger political bombshell, the assassination of Julius Caesar himself. So picture this. Caesar has just defeated King Juba I of Numidia. Big win. But back in Rome, things are falling apart. Caesar gets named dictator for life, and, well, that move basically signed his death warrant. A bunch of senators assassinate him, and suddenly it's a total free-for-all. With Caesar gone, all his allies are scrambling to grab as much power as they can. So to try and get a handle on all this chaos, Caesar's allies come up with a plan. They form what's called a triumvirate. And what is that? Well, it's basically just a fancy word for a three-man ruling committee. The idea was to split up all of Rome's territories between them and, try to stop themselves from immediately going to war with each other. Key phrase there is try. But here's the thing about this power-sharing deal. It wasn't a solution. It was just a countdown to the next big fight. You had Caesar's young great-nephew, Octavian. He got the west. His top general, Mark Antony, took the east. And another guy, Lepidus, he was given Africa. Yeah, this alliance, it had a shelf life of like 5 minutes. The young Octavian, he was clever, cunning, really. He played the long game. First, he accuses Lepidus of treason and just takes Africa away from him. Then he sets his sights on Mark Antony in the east, and it all ends in this massive naval battle. Octavian wins, and just like that, his rivals are gone. He becomes the one and only ruler of Rome, takes on the new name Augustus, and boom, he's the very first Roman emperor. Okay, so here's the thing. The new emperor, Augustus, now controls all of North Africa. But that's a huge territory, and he can't just park legions everywhere to keep it in line. It's too expensive, too complicated. So he comes up with a pretty smart solution, a client king. Basically, you find a local guy, put him on the throne, and let him rule for Rome. And the guy he picked for this job? Oh, he was a fascinating choice. He chose this man, Juba II. And talk about a guy caught between two worlds. He was the perfect symbol of Rome's whole deal with its subjects. See, by birth, he was Numidian. In fact, he was the son of the exact same king Caesar had crushed in battle. But by upbringing, he was pure Roman. He was taken to Rome as a little kid and literally raised in Caesar's own household. But don't get the wrong idea. Juba was no puppet. Not at all. This guy was a real powerhouse in his own right. He built this incredible capital city, Caesarea, full of amazing Roman-style buildings. He was a genuine scholar, wrote books on history, geography, art. He funded scientific expeditions that might have even been the first to find the Canary Islands. And get this, he married Cleopatra Selene II. Yeah, that Cleopatra's daughter, the daughter of Mark Antony and Cleopatra. What a life. But all this golden age of art and science, it was kind of a thin veneer. On the surface, things looked great, but the reality on the ground was way, way shakier. Roman culture, Roman power, that was really just a thing along the coast. You go deeper into the interior, and a totally different story was unfolding. Resentment was building, resistance was starting to bubble up among the tribes. And, well, that tension didn't just stay bubbling under the surface. It exploded. And we're not talking about some small-time skirmish here. No, this became one of the biggest, most violent rebellions in the history of Roman Africa. A brutal war that lasted for 7 years, all led by one man, Takfarinas. So what lit the fuse on this powder keg? Simple, Roman policy. The empire was just taking traditional tribal lands and handing them over to its army veterans as a retirement gift. At the same time, all their forts and patrols were messing up the ancient nomadic routes, the very lifeblood of the local people. It basically pushed them right to the edge.
And the guy leading this whole rebellion? He was the Romans' worst nightmare. A man who knew exactly how they thought, how they fought, because he'd been one of them. Takfarinas was a Numidian tribesman, and he'd served in the Roman army as an auxiliary soldier. He basically took the Roman military playbook and turned it right back on them, and it was devastatingly effective. He gathered up other deserters and angry tribesmen, used his deep knowledge of the desert terrain to his advantage, and then he trained his men with Roman-style discipline. What he created was something new, a super-mobile, hit-and-run guerrilla force that could strike and disappear into the desert, leaving the big, slow Roman legions just baffled.
Now you might think, okay, a rebellion in Africa, why would the emperor in Rome care that much? Well, he cared a lot, because Takfarinas' war got so good at disrupting the green shipments from Africa, Rome's breadbasket, that it actually caused food shortages and riots back in the city of Rome itself. Suddenly, this wasn't some distant colonial issue, it was a crisis hitting the heart of the empire. It took 7 long, bloody years, but the Romans finally figured it out. They had to adapt. They started breaking up their big legions into smaller, faster units to fight fire with fire. Eventually, they cornered Takfarinas in a surprise attack. He chose to go down swinging rather than be captured and put on display in Rome. So, the rebellion was over. It was crushed. But man, it had shaken Rome to its very core. All right, so with the rebellion over, Juba II's son, Ptolemy, takes the throne. And this guy actually helped the Romans defeat Takfarinas. He was even given the title Friend of Rome. So you'd think he's set, right? Safe. But his destiny wasn't going to be decided by a rebel in the desert. No, his fate was going to be sealed by his very own cousin, who just happened to be the new emperor in Rome. And that cousin was Caligula. You know, one of the most paranoid, unhinged, and downright bloodthirsty emperors in all of Roman history. His reign is a masterclass in what happens when one person has way too much power, and it was about to have some deadly and, frankly, just bizarre consequences for the kingdom of Mauretania. So let's just recap for a second. This dynasty survived Caesar's invasion. It survived the Roman civil wars. It survived a massive 7-year native revolt that nearly starved the city of Rome. So after all that, what could possibly bring it all crashing down? I'm telling you, the answer is so absurd it's almost hard to believe. It just shows you the kind of deadly random whims that ruled the day under Caligula.
It was a cloak. A purple cloak. That's it. That's what ended a kingdom.
So here's what happened. Caligula invites his cousin Ptolemy to see some gladiator games in Gaul. Ptolemy shows up, and he's wearing this absolutely stunning purple cloak. Now, where he's from, that's not a big deal. But in Rome, purple was the emperor's color. It was imperial. And the deeply insecure, paranoid Caligula saw this and just lost it. He felt like his cousin was trying to upstage him in front of everybody. And for that, he had him killed. Right there, on the spot. And just like that, over a piece of clothing, it was all over. The last great native kingdom in North Africa was just gone. The entire dynasty of Juba, which had so skillfully navigated the deadly politics of Rome for almost 100 years, was wiped out by a tyrant's fashion critique. So, in the year 40 AD, it became official. The kingdom of Mauretania was annexed and became just another Roman province. It's an incredible arc when you think about it. A 100-year story that starts with the calculated ambition of a Roman general and ends because of the paranoid jealousy of a mad emperor. You know, this whole saga, from Caesar all the way to Caligula, it really makes you think. It leaves us with this huge question, one that you could ask about pretty much any empire in history. When a great power comes in and brings order and peace, who's actually paying the price for it?